While the notion of death in the comic book world is largely a redundant one, there was a famous stance among comic book fans that only 3 deaths would ever truly stick. Those were Uncle Ben, Jason Todd, and Bucky Barnes. Bar alternative versions of the character, Ben Parker has actually remained deceased. As for Jason and Bucky, well, all readers should know that that hasn't been the case for a long time. Much like Jason's resurrection as Red Hood, 2005 saw Bucky shockingly alive and working as a lethal assassin known as the Winter Soldier. Despite certain readers hating the notion that Bucky Barnes' death was being retconned, it didn't take long for writer Ed Brubaker to win fans around as he unraveled Bucky's troubled past. It was a story that nobody wanted to read, but all agreed was phenomenal, and like that, the Winter Soldier became one of the coolest characters in comics. But while he might have an undeniable cool factor about him, Bucky Barnes has a history of carrying out some truly horrendous acts. I'm Will for What Culture, and here are the 8 worst things the Winter Soldier has ever done. 8. Killed Wolverine's pregnant wife. Origins and endings. In the world of Marvel Comics, Wolverine has had more love interests than most heroes have had hot dinners. Seriously, guy gets laid all the time, goddamn. Case in point, Itsu Akihiro. This was yet another relationship of Wolvie's destined to end in heartache for Weapon X. Soon after his time serving in World War II, Wolverine embarked on 5 years of training designed to simmer his ever-short temper. During that time, he met, fell for, and married Itsu, and the couple was soon expecting their first child. That was until Logan returned home to find his pregnant wife brutally murdered. Years later, in the Origins and Endings arc, the Winter Soldier revealed that he was the one who wiped out Itsu in order to draw Wolverine out from his self-imposed hiding. The one silver lining of all this was that Wolverine and Itsu's child was able to be saved and would be adopted. Less of a silver lining, though, is that this son would return years later as the unrelenting villainous Daken, with Logan eventually having no choice but to drown his own flesh and blood as the last resort to stopping his murderous ways. 7. Trained a new generation of assassins. Various comics. Many of you will know that Natasha Romanova, or Romanoff for the MCU guys, was brutally trained in the infamous Red Room from a young age. What you may not be aware is that the Winter Soldier had a spell serving as a trainer in that Soviet facility. This Red Room trains young girls in a whole variety of skills in the hope of creating a production line of lethal assassins, who all happen to be known as Black Widows. After Bucky Barnes was presumed dead and rescued by Soviet forces, the Winter Soldier eventually became a key cog in the Red Room process. To be fair, it kind of only makes sense that if you want to train an elite squad of killer spies, you get the best killer spy on the planet to train them. Either way, not only has the Winter Soldier got the blood of hundreds of people on his hands, he's also responsible for training so many others who have similar blood-soaked mitts. 6. Became the White Skull. What if? Marvel's What If line of books often provides some fascinating and fun shake-ups to the Marvel realm. One such What If story from 2005, however, put a darker spin on Bucky Barnes. This particular tale was set during the American Civil War, and saw Colonel Bucky Barnes serving as Stephen Rogers' commanding officer. The problem here was that this Buck Barnes was a bit of a nutjob who had a penchant for barking orders and going way over the line to get the job done. In fact, the attitude and underhanded antics of this incarnation of Bucky perplexed Rogers. Things came to a head when Barnes ordered Stephen to kill 3 children. After this alternate Captain America did what any Captain America would do and refused, Bucky shot him. Rogers would then be taken in and cared for by a local family, and Bucky Barnes would seek him out in order to finish the job. In this What If story, that initial confrontation between Barnes and Rogers saw the Colonel's face scarred by an eagle. By the time the pair met once again, Colonel Barnes revealed his true form as the disfigured White Skull, and he was even later revealed to be working with the Ku Klux Klan. 5. Murdered Tony Stark's parents. Captain America Civil War. In Captain America Civil War, one of the big beefs between Captain America and Iron Man is the small matter of Cap's bestest bud Bucky being responsible for the death of Tony Stark's parents. Sure, there's the whole fact that Bucky Barnes was a brainwashed killing machine controlled by the Soviet Union at the time, but that still doesn't sit all that well with the old shellhead. During the MCU's spin on Civil War, audiences were shown the big reveal that it was the Winter Soldier who wiped out Howard and Maria Stark. As a part of the film's final acts, the conniving Baron Zemo casually drops some footage of the murder of the Starks, which then causes Iron Man to rightly go off the deep end, realizing that Captain America was aware of Bucky's involvement for some time. Like so much of what Bucky has done as the Winter Soldier, he himself has his own get-out excuse of not being in control of his actions, but that doesn't mean that the things he did during his spell under Soviet control were not absolutely brutal. 4 was responsible for the assassination of JFK. Days gone by. Given that the backstory of the Winter Soldier saw the character tasked with offing a bunch of government officials and high-ranking sorts, many have wondered whether Bucky had a hand in the assassination of John F. Kennedy. In the comics, this has been alluded to and hinted at by comments from Barnes. Most interestingly, there's the Days Gone By story that was the 50th and final issue of the Captain America Volume 5 run. Here, Bucky has taken on the moniker of Captain America as his own, and we find him reflecting back on some of the horrors of his past. One such horror seems to be his involvement in taking out JFK, with several theories and nods suggesting that he was a second gunman for Kennedy's demise. 3. Married Cap's one true love, the Ultimates. Marvel's Ultimate Realm of books was famous for deviating from the established 616 canon in a multitude of ways. While fresh romances were seen, new shocking deaths took place, and certain characters were handed new monikers, Bucky Barnes' own story was completely different to what had taken place in the main, established world of Marvel Comics. In the world of the Ultimates, Buck never actually died during World War II. Instead, he went on to live a long, normal life. One element of Ultimate Bucky that many longtime Marvel fans didn't take too kindly to, however, was the fact that he married Captain America's one true love, Gail Richards. Steve and Gail were an item during World War II, with the pair set to marry, buy a house, and start a family once the war was behind them. Of course, Rogers went missing in action once World War II came to a close, and wasting no time, Bucky began to make goo-goo eyes at the mourning Gail, something that many saw as the character taking advantage in the most awful of ways. Upon Captain America returning to action in the present day, it made for awkward reading for fans to see Rogers happily patting Bucky and Gail on the back. To make things worse in this bizarre situation, Bucky helped to raise Steve's son, a son who would go on to become the Ultimate Universe's version of the sinister Red Skull. 2. Carried out a terrorist attack in Philadelphia, out of time. Some of the chilling acts carried out over the years by the Winter Soldier range from political assassinations to spiteful murders to even crazy alt-world supervillainy, but one of the most outright heinous things done by Bucky is a straight-up terrorist attack. Heading to London to wipe out a bunch of Red Skull cronies, which technically is a good thing, I guess? It transpired that the Winter Soldier was simply taking out these bad guys and gals so that he could get hold of a bomb they were looking to set off. At the behest of Alexander Lukin, Bucky takes the bomb to Philadelphia, and just when you think some all-smiling hero will arrive and save the day, Bucky remotely sets off an explosion that takes out several buildings and kills hundreds of people. This was a brutal, chilling move from the Winter Soldier, and it was just one that reiterated how much of a big deal this character was, and just how much he should be feared. 1. Wiped out and framed a former Bucky, out of time. Not content with setting off a bomb in Philadelphia, the Winter Soldier covered his tracks by pinning the blame on Jack Monroe. At one point in time, Monroe became the third person to take on the mantle of Bucky, with him working with a new Captain America, a Cap who would later go on to become the Grand Director, before both lost their marbles and became babbling messes. After decades of being left frozen in animation or just shot, depending on who was writing the comics of the time, Jack Monroe resurfaced in 1983. For the next couple of decades, Monroe took on the No Man moniker and worked alongside Captain America, even going on to get his own comic book series in the 90s. Unfortunately for Jack, he ended up going on the Winter Soldier's hit list. A drunk Monroe was shot dead and bundled into a car by the newly resurrected Bucky Barnes. From there, Winter Soldier would dump Jack Monroe's corpse next to the Philadelphia bomb as a way to peg the blame on his replacement, assured it would work based on his troubled past. Making the death of Jack Monroe even more tragic, the follow-up The Lonesome Death of Jack Monroe's story explained how Monroe was terminally ill, was a depressed alcoholic, and had been refused access to his daughter. Man, that's a hard way to go. And there you have it, folks, the 8 worst things Bucky Barnes has ever done. Feel free to drop this video a like if you enjoyed it, and drop me a follow on Twitter at YouSlyDogU. I'm Will for What Culture, thanks for hanging out, and I'll see you next time.